The U.S. pulls out of the Iran nuclear deal. Europe and others stay in, saying it is working. So what will be the impact of Donald Trump's decision? Will it, as feared, stoke more Middle East conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. A horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. That's what President Donald Trump said when he announced he was pulling the U.S. out of the international nuclear pact with Iran. And he's reimposing sanctions on Tehran. Trump has the backing of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel, but not China, Russia, the UK, France, or Germany, who all signed the deal and want it to survive. This is how Iran's supreme leader reacted to Trump's decision.
The
US president made worthless and mean remarks. There are probably 10 lies amongst his comments. He announced Washington's withdrawal from the nuclear deal and threatened Iran and its ruling system, and said they would do this and that. On behalf of the Iranian nation, I say, Mr. Trump, you cannot do a damn thing.
After much anticipation, U.S. President Donald Trump made good on a signature campaign promise, solidifying his America First agenda.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. This was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
The U.S. negotiated the agreement with Iran in 2015, along with the United Kingdom, France, Germany, China, and Russia, to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. With the announcement, the United States now reimposes tough economic sanctions on Iran's oil and banking sectors that had been lifted, arguing Iran did not live up to its end of the agreement.
We have definitive proof that this Iranian promise was a lie.
Even though U.S. intelligence, the United Nations, and European allies maintain Iran has been compliant under the agreement, Trump cited a recent Israeli report that Iran had not been truthful about its activities before entering into the deal. Trump also argues the agreement should have dealt with Iran's military pursuits in the region and its ballistic missile program. On Capitol Hill, the top Senate Democrat disagrees.
And to me, the right thing to do would have been to try and come up with our allies with an agreement on those issues and let the nuclear part of this continue as is, because it's not being violated in any way.
Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama, the man who oversaw the deal, called Trump's decision a serious mistake. In a statement, Obama said without the agreement, the United States could eventually be left with a losing choice between a nuclear-armed Iran or another war in the Middle East. Indeed, former Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders believes the United States is already on that path.
The road to the war in Iraq did not simply begin in 2003. It was laid down brick by brick over a number of years.
Ironically, as the president tore up the nuclear deal with Iran, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was on his way to North Korea, laying the groundwork for a nuclear deal with Pyongyang. President Trump indicated the United States is willing to negotiate a new deal with Iran, but he says his decision also signals the United States will no longer make what Trump calls empty threats. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, let's have a closer look at the deal, which requires Iran to significantly limit its nuclear program in return for the lifting of economic sanctions. That includes Iran reducing the number of its centrifuges, the machines used to enrich uranium, and keeping enrichment levels at 3.67%, below what's required to make nuclear bombs. The Foad nuclear reactor, one of the country's biggest underground plants, is to be used only for non-military research. There's to be no building of any heavy water plants for 15 years, and the one at Arak redesigned so it produces less plutonium. and inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to have access to all Iran's declared facilities and help with an inquiry into past design work on nuclear warheads. Let's now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining us from Tehran, Foad Izadi, professor of political science at the University of Tehran. In Washington, D.C., Reza Marashi, research director at the National Iranian American Council. And in London, Nicholas Fitzroy, the Middle East analyst for the Economist Intelligence Unit. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. Reza, I want to start with you. Leaders of France, the UK, and Germany all have expressed concern and regret. They want this deal to keep going. What can they do to ensure that it will?
Well, we should be very honest about the fact that it's going to be a Herculean task for Europe to keep this deal alive absent U.S. participation, and it's going to require absolutely nothing less than a European willingness to essentially do what Russia and China have long been doing, which is create political and financial infrastructure outside of U.S. jurisdiction to make sure that business and financial transactions with Iran can take place outside of the long arm of U.S. law.
All right, Fuad, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has condemned the U.S. for this action, but Iranian officials have also said that they want to make sure this deal lives on. Will they be able to keep the deal going?
We have to wait and see. I think what Reza said is accurate. If the Europeans are able to do these type of activities, if they can manage to withstand the pressure that is going to come from the United States, if they enact blocking regulations that are designed to protect European companies, and if other countries that deal with Iran, Russia, China, other countries, are able to make sure that the benefits that was supposed to come to Iran under the nuclear agreement actually does come, and people in Iran see these benefits, then there is a chance that the nuclear agreement will continue. But if U.S. brings back the sanctions and the other members of P5+1 cannot manage to make sure that the agreement is actually implemented, then Iran has no reason to stay in the agreement. And today, Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was quite doubtful if Europeans can actually manage to do this. And he said that if they cannot, then Iran will get out. So the possibility of Iran leaving the agreement is quite serious.
Nicholas, we've all seen these images today of the anger being expressed toward the U.S. in Iran's parliament, images of the U.S. flag being burned. So I want to ask you, is Donald Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iranian nuclear deal a gift to hardliners in Iran? Does this give them the leg up politically?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. What he's done here is he has basically empowered the hardliners within Iran. And this could well just work against exactly what he's trying to do. He talks about security in the region. But if he does empower the hardliners in this way, does that then make the foreign policy that Iran enacts more aggressive towards the US and actually put them in more trouble in the region than they were before? I think it probably does.
Reza, I want you to tell our viewers about the mood among European allies of the US. Of course, we've seen that the UK, Germany, France, that all their leaders have practically been begging President Trump to stay in this deal. Trump didn't heed their advice. This is more than a snub. This seems to be an outright rebuke. What does this do to those relationships, and how must these leaders be feeling right now?
Well, I think it's quite telling when the President of the United States disregards the advice and requests of America's long-standing closest allies in the world and instead chooses to partner up with the likes of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. I just spent the last 2 weeks in Europe traveling around talking to government and non-government officials. And the unfortunate reality is, A, they didn't have a plan for this. B, now they're quickly trying to put together a plan. And C, it remains to be seen the degree to which they're willing to allow Donald Trump to rupture, perhaps irreparably, transatlantic relations to try and maintain the kind of relationship that they have with Iran. I would add, though, last but not least, that it's short-sighted on the part of European officials who might view this only through the prism of Iran. We have the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We have questions of Article 5 on NATO. Example after example after example of Donald Trump slapping our longest-standing allies in Europe in the face. And at some point in time, the Europeans are going to have to realize that friends don't let friends drive drunk. And we have a governance problem in the United States right now. And if a bully keeps bullying you, the only way to get him to stop is to punch him in the nose.
Foad, President Trump has also said that if Iran is willing to sit down at the table and renegotiate a nuclear deal, that he is willing and able to do so as well. But is that something that you could foresee Iran being willing to do?
It's going to be a political suicide for any Iranian politician to even think about it and mention it. Given President Trump's history and mentality and a state of mind, that deal will last just a few months probably. And the example that the United States has provided is that don't trust the Americans because they make an agreement and they violate it quite quickly. So it's not going to be possible for Iran to engage in any type of agreement with the United States. What the US needs to do is actually go back to the agreement that existed, implement it properly, and then if they have grievances, those grievances could be addressed in other venues. But for Iran to go back is not going to happen. And the mentality that thought that if they get out of this deal, they can have a better deal, is going to be quite sorry when they realize that's not going to happen.
Nicholas, I want to shift gears here a little bit and ask you, is there any mechanism in place by which Europeans could try to protect their growing commercial interests in Iran from the threat of U.S. sanctions anew?
Well, I mean, there is a precedent of a blocking statute from the 1990s. It was never used, so it is difficult to know exactly how it would go in regard to the U.S. sanctions. But there is a mechanism that could be drawn up. I think it's unlikely that it would be introduced, though. I mean, the EU has to get unanimous, has to make a unanimous decision with all the different countries, and there will be some that would rather choose the US than Iran in this situation.
Reza, is there any indication right now that the US would really want to renegotiate this deal? I mean, does Trump actually want some kind of a deal? Or is this an indication that the hawks are winning out and that confrontation or possible confrontation is looming?
I think Trump and the people that he's surrounded himself with in senior leadership positions in the White House, with the possible exception of Jim Mattis, aren't really interested in negotiating a new deal. What they're interested in is capitulation. And that's not going to happen from the Iranian side. I can promise you that. So really what we have now is a situation where if we hearken back to the days of 2005 to 2013, Iran's former president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was so politically toxic in Washington that he essentially rendered the viability of sustained diplomacy between the US and Iran impossible. And I think Donald Trump has essentially become the Ahmadinejad version inside of Iran's politics now, where it is going to be borderline impossible for any Iranian official to go into a National Security Council meeting and argue with any kind of veracity and accuracy that Iran can do business with this man. So this is what makes it even more important for the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the rest of the world to really step up and prevent the Donald Trumps and the John Boltons and the Mike Pompeos from achieving for what they've been lusting after for so long now. They've said it in their own words: regime change and war.
Foad, do you believe that the White House is actively pursuing regime change in Iran, and would that even be possible?
It is not going to be possible. They have been daydreaming about regime change for about 40 years since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It is not going to be possible, but if you look at the hearing that Mike Pompeo had for his Secretary of State confirmation, he was asked this exact same question several times. And his answer was essentially yes, they are trying to have regime change in Iran. If you look at the 2018 budget, US budget, there are millions of dollars that are dedicated to what they call democracy promotion, which when it comes to Iran, it's regime change. So the attempt is there. The CIA, other intelligence services of the United States are putting a lot of pressure to actually achieve destabilization in Iran, to cause unrest on Iranian streets. We have some terrorist organizations like MKO that are working very closely with the US government to actually achieve regime change. Giuliani, now Trump's personal attorney, was attending an MKO conference just a few days ago. And the basic message that he had was that he wants to see a new government in Iran. So the desire is there, but the reality is far from what they actually are thinking about.
Reza, I want to get your reaction to that too, to pick up on what Foad was saying. You know, especially in light of this video we saw of Rudy Giuliani pretending to spit on the Iran nuclear agreement just a few days back. Do you believe that the U.S. is actively pursuing regime change in Iran?
There's no doubt in my mind that the United States is actively pursuing regime change in Iran. The majority of those efforts are going to be done covertly. They're going to be operationalized covertly through three-letter agencies here in the States. So we're not going to be able to suss out the details and the specifics. But I think it's safe to say that the primary venue in an effort to try and avoid a similar kind of fiasco that erupted after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, today the primary vehicle is going to be economic warfare. And they're essentially to do everything in their power, both covertly and overtly, to try and tank the Iranian economy. And I think that's reprehensible because you have 80 million lives inside of Iran at stake. We are talking about not just cars and things like that. You're talking about savings, the total of which and the value of which plummet. You're talking about cancer medicine, things that affect everyday lives, food, for God's sakes. So yes, I do think that's the direction that we're going in, and we need to be very honest about that going forward, because this administration, after what happened yesterday, the stunt they pulled yesterday, does not deserve the benefit of the doubt.
And Nicholas, I want to broaden out some of the topics that Reza was just speaking about now, particularly when it comes to the economy in Iran. Now, of course, economic fallout is a big part of this. You know, you've had Boeing and Airbus, they'd planned to sell jets to Iran. These were huge deals. Total had signed a $2 billion agreement. General Electric received millions of dollars in orders from Iran just last year. The White House is now saying that those doing business in Iran will be provided a period of time to allow them to wind down operations, and those that don't risk severe consequences. So who stands to get hurt the most economically from all this?
I mean, Iran stands to get hurt the worst economically from this. There's no doubt, because, I mean, not only could there be a big withdrawal of much needed foreign investment, but there are already economic grievances within the country. We saw that in the protests in December and January. And so issues like rapid depreciation of the currency on the black market, potentially a cutback in oil export receipts. These are the kind of things which are really going to cause some damage.
Reza, what do you think the immediate fallout would be when it comes to oil and gas prices?
Well, I think that oil and gas prices are going to increase. The only question is how quickly and for what amount of time. And I think you'll see efforts on the part of Saudi Arabia and maybe even Russia to flood the market if, in fact, Iranian oil and gas is taken off the market at a rapid pace. I think the effort on the part of the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia and any other like-minded country will be to try and make sure that Iranian oil and gas exports are reduced as quickly as possible. But again, depending on the extent to which China, Russia, India, Japan, South Korea, and of course the Europeans step up to the plate and say, enough is enough, we're not going to let this happen, that's going to dictate the degree to which the Trump administration is going to be successful at, I don't want to call it a policy or a strategy, because they have neither.
Foad, President Trump, of course, has received support from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia, from Israel. What does this mean for the wider Middle East?
It could mean war. We have these three governments that have been trying to put more pressure on Iran. They would like to see a military confrontation. between Iran and the United States. They basically would like to see a war that is using American soldiers to kill Iranian soldiers and vice versa. And the reality is that the region is going through a very painful process. Syria is slowly coming out of a civil war. We have the humanitarian situation in Yemen. Thousands of people are either getting killed or are dying from sickness. And the reality is that if these type of policies continue, if the foreign policy of the United States is dictated by people like Bibi Netanyahu or Mohammed bin Salman, then you're going to see serious consequences that is going to affect the world economy. It's going to affect Europe and other neighboring regions. And the end result is going to be a man-made, manufactured disaster that is going to be very painful for everybody. Iran has been under a lot of pressure. Iran is used to pressure, but I think other countries like the Saudis or the Israelis, they cannot withstand the pressure that will come if they engage in reckless activities against Iran.
Nicholas, in light of all this, what must Russia and China be thinking now, and do you believe that they are poised to gain an advantage from all this?
I think that's probably right, actually, yeah. They're in a position now where they can effectively, if they manage to keep the deal going, they're in a position where they can really drive a wedge between the US and the EU, the sort of traditional alliance there. So particularly for Russia, that could be a big gain. And so I think not only will they look to uphold the deal, I think they're going to keep importing and trading with Iran, and they'll encourage the Europeans to do so, because it could be a big win for them, yeah.
Reza, of course, President Trump, when he made his announcement he was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, as soon as that was over, pivoted to North Korea and the nuclear talks that he wants to have with Kim Jong-un. So I want to ask you, what does this say about the U.S. to North Korea, the fact that they pulled out of this deal? And will this make North Korea think twice about getting into some kind of nuclear agreement with the U.S.?
I don't think it's just going to make North Korea think twice about American credibility, because that's really what we're talking about here, is American credibility. I think it's going to make everybody around the world think twice about American credibility, because now we've set up a precedent, an incredibly dangerous precedent here in Washington, where landmark diplomatic agreements can be struck, and then 2.5, 3 years later, if a new political party comes into office, they can simply disregard it, violate it, sweep it to the side, and say, just kidding, it never happened. And that's not the way that business and diplomacy is supposed to be conducted in international relations and foreign policy. So never mind the fact that Kim hasn't promised the United States anything new. Never mind the fact that it's utter diplomatic malpractice to start negotiations at the head of state level, because if you fail at that level, you have nothing left and it makes war more likely. When you try to strike a nuclear deal, and then weeks before you begin those efforts, you disregard a successful one that was working by every objective measure, I have a hard time believing how it's beneficial to American interests or global interests.
Foad, I'm going to give you the last word here, but very quickly, please, in 30 seconds or less, could you tell me what the mood is in Tehran today after President Trump's announcement?
Well, it depends. I have had people congratulating me today. They were sick of the nuclear agreement that was not really working out for Iran. The U.S. was not doing what Iran was supposed to do. And I'm sure some people, especially in Rouhani government, are quite sad.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Reza Marashi, Foad Izadi, and Nicholas Fitzroy, thanks for being with us. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.